to the top 10% of income earners in this country. By definition, by priority, what I see and what I think Canadians see is that this Liberal government and my Liberal colleagues across believe that the Canadian middle class is those earning $190,000 and more. Thank you.
Statements by members. The honourable member from Brampton North.
Madam Speaker, I rise before this House to recognize a high school in my riding of Brampton North and the great social activism undertaken by its grade 10 students. Louise Arbour Secondary School is named after a distinguished Canadian who is recognized for her contributions to the Canadian justice system and for her dedication to advancing human rights throughout the world. For this reason, all grade 10 students at Louise Arbour Secondary School are tasked with completing a social action project. I had the great privilege to meet and hear from the following dynamic students: Arman Bangu, Arshdeep Benapal, Gravir Gill, and Jaspreet Heer. These students have begun to take action on issues that they have found to be of vital concern to Brampton and Canada as a whole. Issues such as domestic violence, air pollution, gun crime, animal abuse, and school violence, just to name a few. As their representative in this House, I want to recognize them for their dedication and passion and encourage them to stay engaged in their community.
The honourable member for Haldimand Norfolk.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this opportunity to say thank you to all the residents of my beautiful riding of Haldimand Norfolk who came out to vote on October 19th, with a particular thanks to those who voted to allow me to serve for a 5th term as their Member of Parliament. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be able to serve such a remarkable riding and its people for a further 4 years. I'll continue to work hard to be the strong Conservative voice that my constituents have asked for in Ottawa, and I'll continue to fight to make our riding an even more wonderful place to live, to work, and to raise a family. From Long Point to Lowbanks, from Caledonia to Kelvin and Cortland, once again, I'd like to thank folks for their support.
The honourable member for Hamilton West and Castor Dundas.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to start by thanking the wonderful people of Hamilton West and Castor Dundas who put their trust and confidence in me. I will work every day tirelessly for Hamilton. Today, I wish to speak briefly about my father, Phil Tassi. He was a proud steelworker. He believed in people and worked hard to have people believe in themselves. His example inspires and guides me every day. His approach to life represents Hamilton to me. We are a city of achievement and hard work. We are Canada's biggest steel manufacturer. Now we are innovators in health, advanced manufacturing, and the creative industries. Hamilton was recently named Canada's top-ranked investment city. People have called Hamilton many things: the hammer, the steel city. We are these things, but we're much more. Through our care and support for each other, we chase our dreams with compassion and stubborn belief. I am proud to represent Hamilton, the ambitious city.
Member for Hamilton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, today marks the beginning of Black History Month, and I'm honoured to rise in this House to celebrate the many contributions that Canadians of African and Caribbean descent have made to our great country. In my hometown of Hamilton, the history of these distinguished Canadians runs deep. The Reverend John C. Holland, the son of runaway slaves, was one of Hamilton's most important leaders and the pastor of Stewart Memorial Church, which has its own significant history as part of the Underground Railway. The Honourable Lincoln Alexander was Canada's first Black Member of Parliament, first Black Cabinet Minister, and first Black Lieutenant Governor of Ontario. The legacy of these two outstanding Hamiltonians continues today through the work of people like Evelyn Myrie, a driving force in building inclusivity in Hamilton, and Matthew Green, who became Hamilton's first Black City Councillor in 2014. I encourage everyone to take the time to learn the stories of the many people in Hamilton and all across Canada who played an important role in our history and continue to work to create a more inclusive and a more equal Canada. Thank you.
The honourable member for Yukon.
I'm sure it's an unchallenged truth that the Yukon is the most beautiful riding in the country, with the tallest mountains in Canada, the biggest ice fields outside the polar caps, the largest gold rush, World Heritage National Parks, and a 1,000-mile sled dog race. There are tremendous mining, tourism, IT, and arts and culture industries, and very successful Yukon First Nation development corporations. The most important resource, however, of the Yukon is its wonderful people. There are 14 distinct First Nations and large Francophone and Filipino communities, and you get a chance to meet them all today, not only here, but at the Premier's reception for Yukon Days. You can meet the presidents of the Chambers of Commerce, of the mining executives, the Grand Chief, 5 chiefs and deputy chiefs, the Mayor of Whitehorse, the Premier and his ministers, and a delegation of over 50, all working together for the best future of Yukon people. It happens all this evening from 5 to 7 at the Chateau Laurier. Come one and come all and enjoy true Yukon hospitality.
The honourable member for Renfrew-Nipissing Pembroke.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015 it cost Ontario electricity users almost $1.8 billion to send 22.6 million megawatts of electricity south to light the skyscrapers of New York, rather than keep that power to save taxpayers' dollars and give a break to 2.4 million average Ontario households that consume that amount of power. Electricity bills have increased over 68% since the Green Energy Act was inflicted on Ontarians. The Green Energy Act is making a lot of Liberals and their multinational friends wealthy at the expense of seniors and others on fixed incomes who are forced to sit in their winter coats in the dark as they cannot afford to turn on the heat and lights. Energy policy madness has returned to Ottawa with Liberal policy that prefers Canadians buy foreign oil shipped by tanker from Venezuela over environmentally safer methods like Canadian-controlled pipelines. Well, it's 2016, and thanks to Liberal energy policy, for 570,000 households in Ontario.
L'honorable député d'Avignon.
The honourable member for Avignon, Madame Baptiste Matapédia. Mr. Speaker, I want to highlight the outstanding contribution of a dedicated journalist from my riding, Mr. Pierre Morel, who worked to inform the people at home throughout an almost 40-year career. Pierre, like other journalists of the region, was a stalwart for regional information. Unfortunately, regional issues are the poor cousin of media coverage, and according to Influence Communications' most recent report, regional news in the Gaspésie is now at 0.1%. This is a direct result of the media presence in our region. Our region is bursting with talent, dedicated entrepreneurs, visionaries, and creators, and we have the luck to have amongst our citizens people who produce documentaries, animated films, video games, and other creations that promote our culture across the country. We promised during the campaign to reinvest in the CBC, and that is what we will do. Mr. Speaker, if our regions, our people, and our culture shine across Quebec and the rest of Canada, we'll be able to attract new investments and promote new economic development and sustainable jobs. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
Mr. Speaker, it is my pleasure to recognize the week of February 1st to 5th as Canadian School Counselling Week. School counselors are employed in public and private schools to help students reach their full potential. We all know school counselors are actively committed to helping students explore their abilities, strengths, interests, and talents as these traits relate to their career awareness and development. Mr. Speaker, school counselors help parents focus on ways to further the educational, personal, and social growth of their children. School counselors seek to identify and utilize community resources that can enhance and complement comprehensive school counseling programs and help students become productive members of society. Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank all of our dedicated counselors for all they do for our children and communities and wish them all a happy Canadian School Counseling Week.
The honourable member for Montmagny. The honourable member for Montmagny, Kamouraska, Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to highlight today the phenomenal work done by an entrepreneur sharing his expertise well beyond the boundaries of my riding. He employs more than 3,500 people around the world and humbly contributes to improving the services offered to our community. Mr. Bernard Bélanger, who is the president of the board of Premier Tech, whose global headquarters are located in Rivière-du-Loup, trumps the old adage that no man is a prophet in his own land. After having received the National Order of the Legion of Honor from French President François Hollande, it was his country's turn to highlight his outstanding career by making him a member of the Order of Canada. This is the most prestigious civilian honor in our country. Mr. Bélanger is an example of tenacity, professionalism, and humanism. All of his accomplishments, and particularly those in the area of horticultural farming of peat, are in line with the recognition that reflects on our beautiful region and the rest of Canada. Congratulations, Mr. Bélanger. The Honourable Member for Montarville. Mr. Speaker, today we celebrate the 96th anniversary of the founding of the RCMP. Since the term of Commissioner Aylesworth Bowen Perry and the first crossing of the Saint-Roch schooner by constables of the Maritime Section in 1932, the RCMP has evolved along with the country. Under Commissioner Maurice Jean Nadon, the first class of female officers graduated from Depot in Regina in 1975, and in 1990, Baltej Singh Dhillon, a Sikh officer, gained the right to wear the turban in RCMP colors. Mr. Speaker, I have had the privilege of working with the RCMP Integrated Market Enforcement Team. Since February the 1st, 1920, Maintien le droit has been the motto of those who risk their lives to ensure our safety and protect our values. Let us wish them a happy anniversary.
The Honourable Member for Beaches, East York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every year, almost half of Canadians over the age of 15 perform volunteer work, a collective contribution of over 2 billion hours. Today, I would like to recognize one individual specifically, Olive Dodds. Olive is 105 years old and still makes time to volunteer at Toronto East General, now known as Michael Garron Hospital. She credits the hospital for having saved her life, and amazingly, she's volunteered for the hospital for the last 30 years. A former nurse, Olive is particularly known for her knitting, as she continues to knit dolls for sale to raise funds for the hospital, as well as hats and clothes for newborns. As the Member of Parliament for Beaches East York, I thank Olive Dodds for her service, for her kindness, and for her commitment to volunteerism.
Wonderful. The Honourable Member for Calgary Signal Hill.
Mr. Speaker, generally a Member of Parliament is pleased to stand in his or her place in this House and say positive things about his or her riding, but unfortunately today is not that day. In the past year, more than 100,000 Albertans have lost their jobs, and much of their pride with it, many in my constituency. And Mr. Speaker, many more job losses are expected in 2016. Now, we all recognize that many of these job losses are due to the significant drop in world oil prices, but there are things this government could do to mitigate some of these job losses. And Mr. Speaker, government infrastructure money or a $250 million special equalization payment will not put these folks back to work. What is really needed is for this government to show some leadership and come out publicly in support of pipeline construction projects. And members of the government could do that tonight, Mr. Speaker, by voting for our motion, which was debated last Thursday. Several pipeline proposals that would move more than 1 million barrels of oil safely to market are in the hearing process. But instead of showing support, Mr. Speaker, this government has introduced more red tape and extended the timeline for making decisions. I challenge at least...
The Honourable Member for Hull Aylmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm honored to rise to call your attention to Black History Month. It was 20 years ago that this House unanimously adopted a motion introduced by the Honourable Jean Augustine to recognize the month of February as Black History Month. Elected in 1993, Jean Augustine was the first Black female Member of Parliament. And I want to emphasize that in 2015, it produced a historic number of Black parliamentarians. 20 years later, Black History Month continues to be an important opportunity for Canadians to learn about the long history of Black people in this country, starting with Mathieu de Costa, who in 1603 acted as a translator between the Mi'kmaq and the French with Champlain. I encourage all Canadians to take advantage of the events organized throughout the country to learn more about the historical and current contributions of Black Canadians to our country.
The honourable member for Skeena-Bulkley Valley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to honour the signing of the final agreement of the Great Bear Rainforest contract. After 20 years of struggle and conflict, First Nations leaders, environmental advocates, businesses, labour and municipalities have crafted an agreement that not only protects forever 85% of British Columbia's central and north coast, they have also shown Canada and the world the way forward towards true resolution and true reconciliation. For those unfamiliar with this stunning part of the world, the Great Bear covers almost 6.5 million hectares of coastline from the north coast of Vancouver Island to the Alaskan Panhandle. The agreement is a testament to the power of people overcoming historical differences, and it is a model upon which to build trust between people long divided, protect what must be protected. Today, we all honor them, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, remember the 1993 film Free Willy? The movie begins with a pod of orcas swimming near the coastline of the Pacific Northwest. The pod is tracked by a group of whalers, and one of the whales, Willie, is snared in their nets and taken away to a local amusement park to perform tricks. Is that what happened, Mr. Speaker, to Saskatchewan's only representative in the Liberal cabinet, the Minister of Public Safety? The trappings of power snared him, and he's unwilling to stand up for the people of Saskatchewan. Now, Mr. Speaker, during the election, the Liberals promised free votes. So Saskatchewan residents will be watching closely tonight to see if the minister votes in favour of tonight's opposition motion calling on the government to stand up and support Energy East. Or will he still be shackled by a Prime Minister whose real agenda is to promote and stop pipelines from being built? Mr. Speaker, in 1993, they freed Willie. In 2016, I say, free Ralph. Free
The member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan. He has a sense of humor, but he's an experienced member, and he well knows we don't use members' names here. We use, of course, their riding name or their department if it's a minister. So I know I can count on him to not do that anymore. Oral questions orales. The honourable. I'm sorry, no. We're still on member statements. Excuse me. The honourable member for Whitby.
Monsieur le Président, je me lève.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today, February 1st, in recognition of the beginning of Black History Month.
Canadians across the country will have opportunities to recognize and commemorate many and varied contributions and experiences of Black Canadians. Too often we regard history as ancient, with little to no connection to our current lives. I strongly urge each member of this House to reflect on their own personal story and how it is impacted by Black history. My own parents, Ray and Odessa Caesar, came to this country from Grenada with $100 in their pockets. I have heard about the racism they endured and overcame. It is important to recognize at this time how far we have come as a country and how far we still have to go. It is also an opportunity to recommit ourselves to ensuring equity and justice are a reality for all Canadians, regardless of the color of their skin. Merci.
Thank you.
Questions orales, oral questions. The honourable leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, workers and families in the resource sector in Canada do not trust this Prime Minister. Thousands of smart Canadians work hard, but people in the resource sector have no jobs. The Prime Minister has a chance to offer them hope by supporting Energy East. Will he do the right thing and show his support to the oil sector workers?
Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, every member of this House knows that there are Canadians who are suffering from job losses because of low commodity prices. They're suffering in Alberta, in Saskatchewan, in Newfoundland and Labrador, in New Brunswick. We need to establish a credible process that will have the confidence of Canadians. Mr. Speaker, the previous government from 2011 built no pipelines because the process was not credible. We are in a better position today, Mr. Speaker, than we were a week ago.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, what's concerning is the Prime Minister's track record so far on these issues. Northern Gateway, of course, was approved with over 200 conditions, and the proponent was working to meet those conditions. But the Prime Minister killed it by unilaterally announcing a transportation ban off the West Coast. Why? Because he doesn't actually value these jobs. If Energy East and other projects do manage to get approved through this new process, how can he be trusted he won't politically interfere again and unilaterally kill more jobs?
I'm the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I'm glad that the honourable member brought up the matter of trust. And it was a lack of trust in the regulatory process under their regime that resulted in no pipelines built to Tidewater from 2011. We have consulted widely across the country and across sectors and across regions, and we believe that today we have a better chance of instilling confidence among Canadians than we had when they were running the show.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Workers and families in Canada's resource sector are feeling completely abandoned by this minister and by the Prime Minister. Tens of thousands of smart, hardworking, and yes, resourceful Canadians are out of work. The Prime Minister has a chance to offer those people some hope tonight. He can vote in favour of our motion to support Energy East. Will he do the right thing and show these people that he has their back?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, there will be hope when Canadians are faced with a regulatory regime that has their confidence. And that will only be done if we meaningfully consult with Indigenous communities, with industry, with environmental groups across regions of the country. With good process and with good regulatory controls, we have a much better chance of being where all of members of this House want to be, moving our resources to Tidewater sustainably.
Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, it is now clear that the Minister of Finance is living in a dream world because he believes that by spending more, people get richer, and yet Canadians know that that's not the case and that a balanced budget is required. Will the Minister of Finance get hold of himself and convince his Prime Minister to change course and to adopt a rigorous budgetary policy instead of relying on structural deficits? The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we committed to Canadians that we would put in place an approach to fiscal management that would be prudent and that would be responsible. We've told Canadians that we will reduce the net debt to GDP over the course of our mandate. We've told them that we will work towards a balanced budget during the course of our mandate. What we will do is we will make investments that will enhance the long-term productivity of our country to enhance Canada for all Canadians.
Yes. The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, Canadians know that it is only businessmen who create wealth by investing, and that the government is spending money that we don't have. That's what the Minister of Finance is doing. Will the Minister of Finance stop having Canadians believe that he inherited a deficit? Because on Friday, his public servants told him clearly that he inherited a surplus of over $400 million in November 2015. Will he be frank with Canadians once and for all and confirm with them that he did receive a budget surplus? Honourable Minister of Finance.
Speaker, we released an economic and fiscal update in December which gave Canadians a transparent and clear understanding of where we stand. It showed that the 2015-2016 budget year looks to have about a $3 billion deficit, as opposed to the surplus that our predecessor government claimed might be in existence.
Honourable member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, in an interview disseminated yesterday, the Prime Minister was asked by an employee who had lost his job what his plan was for the manufacturing sector. But the Prime Minister didn't give a clear response at all. For the past 10 years, over 400,000 good jobs have been lost in the manufacturing sector in this country. That's workers, families, and communities who are hard hit by this government's recklessness. Can the Prime Minister tell us whether he has a plan to support the manufacturing sector? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell the member opposite that we will never, ever turn our back on the manufacturing sector. It represents 1.7 million jobs. It represents 10% of our economy, Mr. Speaker. And we're going to be putting forward a comprehensive innovation agenda that will really look to help create jobs in the manufacturing sector, Mr. Speaker, because it's an important part of our economy. It's an important part of our growth agenda, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Hochelaga. Mr. Speaker, workers like Neil in the interview yesterday want concrete action. They want a plan. They want to know where we're headed. How can the Prime Minister have nothing tangible to say? The manufacturing sector is a pillar of our economy, and other sectors are also being hard hit. For example, last week, Transcontinental, Jean Coutu, these all had job losses. It's high time that the Prime Minister listen to workers and do something for them. Where's the government's plan for good jobs?
The Honourable Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to remind the member opposite that we do have a plan. It's a plan that's focused on growth, Mr. Speaker. It's a plan that had the opportunity, for example, when it came to the automotive sector, to speak to the global heads in the OEM in Detroit. When we talked about how great this country is, the workforce that we have, the diversity that we have, the investments that we're making, Mr. Speaker, we have a plan on infrastructure, on helping the middle class, on innovation. These are important investments that will help grow the economy and create jobs from coast to coast to coast.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
Mr. Speaker, Neil from London asked the Prime Minister what he planned to do to bring back good jobs to our city. Like far too many, Neil lost his manufacturing job when his plant closed. It was a serious and important question. People are looking for help. But the Prime Minister had nothing but empty platitudes and no real plan to revive manufacturing jobs. That's simply not good enough. What will the government do to rebuild manufacturing jobs and help people like Neil?
Hear, hear. The Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, we understand the plight and the challenges and the concerns Canadians are facing. That is why I'm very, very fortunate to work with great organizations like FedDev that have made commitments and investments in Southern Ontario, investments that will help create jobs, Mr. Speaker. I made an announcement with the Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, to show us leadership in clean technology. When it comes to healthcare, Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to make these investments that will create good, meaningful jobs here in Canada, Mr. Speaker, for today and for tomorrow.
The Honourable Member for London Fanshawe.
But, Mr. Speaker, a year ago, the Prime Minister told Londoners to give up on manufacturing. It seems he's learned very little since. Neil had a good job and a pension before his plant closed. But as he nears 65, he has no savings and he's worried he will lose his home. And he's not alone. Millions of Canadians don't have enough to retire in dignity. While the Liberals are rushing to give billions in tax cuts to the wealthy, why are they delaying help for workers like Neil who need it the most?
The Minister of Innovation.
Mr. Speaker, again, the member opposite should know that we made very important investments through the regional development agencies to create jobs today and for tomorrow, Mr. Speaker. These investments will help people like Neil and others who are transitioning, Mr. Speaker. But more importantly, we have a plan to grow the economy. We did not run on austerity, Mr. Speaker. We ran on growth. And that's very, very important. The infrastructure investment that we're making, the Canada Child Benefit investment that we're making, the tax cut for the middle class, Mr. Speaker, all these are important measures to help grow the middle class and those that wanted to join it.
The Honourable Member for Portage Lisgar.
Mr. Speaker, here's a quote. Let me be very clear on Energy East. I am pro-pipeline. I am pro-Energy East. I'm going to be an advocate for St. John. I'm going to move forward whatever is best for our riding. Who said that? Well, it wasn't the Prime Minister. In fact, it was the Liberal member for St. John Rothsay. If the Liberal government will not support our motion tonight and stand up for jobs in the economy, will they at least allow their members to have a free vote like the member from New Brunswick and stand up and keep his word to his constituents?
The Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that there is no one in this House who speaks more clearly, more loudly, more passionately for the people from St. John as the member does, and we hear it all the time. There is no political party in this House that has a compassion, a monopoly on compassion. And I can assure you, Mr. Speaker, and I can assure the member, that there are members of this caucus who understand that the best way that we will deliver to market is...
The honourable member for Portage-Lisgar.
I'll take that as a no, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, in addition, this new government is putting roadblocks in the way of an already rigorous process under the National Energy Board. In fact, we've learned it's the Minister's office themselves that will be creating this new report. Decisions on pipelines will be based on who makes the most noise and who has the most influence in this cabinet. How can Canadians have any faith in this new process when the biggest consideration will be political influence with the Liberals?
Now the Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, we are determined to modernize the National Energy Board, and we will be asking Canadians from coast to coast to offer constructive opinions about how that can best be done. Those Canadians include members opposite, who you would think would have more of an interest than anybody else in a credible regulatory process.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
This government is all about political interference on pipelines. Canadians need a real leader and a government that represents all of us. Creating jobs and growth is not the priority when they fail to support Energy East and Canada's world-leading energy development. It's certainly not the priority of their Alberta MPs. Mr. Speaker, when will the Liberals stop undermining the energy sector and start supporting Canadian oil and Canadian jobs?
Good question. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, 20% of the national economy is dependent on natural resources. This is the way it's been in Canada for a very long time, and it will continue to be. And it is the aim of this government, and I'm sure every member of the House, to move our resources to market sustainably. We need a process to do it. We've announced that process. We believe that we have a better chance of achieving that common goal today than we did last week.
The honourable member for Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, as members of this House, our chief responsibility is to represent our constituents first and foremost. Yet, as Alberta loses tens of thousands of jobs, Liberal Alberta MPs remain silent on a shovel-ready, job-creating infrastructure project. The regulatory changes the government plans will only add red tape, time and cost, and delay critical infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, will at least one Alberta Liberal MP join me today and vote for Energy East?
The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Mr. Speaker, the delay under the former Conservative government was a permanent delay because there were no pipelines built between 2011 and October the 19th. And the reason is because the process was not credible. We know that these projects will not go forward unless it is. We're doing what we think is responsible by talking to Canadians about the ways in which they will have more public confidence in a system that didn't work under the former government.
Honourable member for Abbotsford.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are becoming very frustrated as they wait for this government to tell them what its climate change plan looks like and how much it will cost Canadian consumers and taxpayers. Last Friday, the minister met with her provincial and territorial counterparts in secret and then announced nothing, simply that they had all met. No plan, no strategy, no economic assessment, Not even a substantive progress report. To the Minister, where's the plan and what happened to transparency?
Honourable Minister of Environment.
Mr. Speaker, I was very proud to meet with the Ministers of Environment from the provinces and territories. In fact, this was the first time in over a decade that we've had a meeting between them. First time in over a decade that we'd actually met to talk about the challenges of climate change. And in fact, in showing transparency, we put out where our emission profiles are. We are now working very hard to develop a pan-Canadian plan so that we can tackle climate change and grow our economy. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member for Abbotsford.
Actually, Mr. Speaker, the Minister is quite incorrect. The Ministers actually met last June 2015. And Mr. Speaker, in the lead up to the Paris Climate Change Conference, the Prime Minister dropped a bombshell on Canadians. He announced without warning and without a climate change plan that he will spend almost $3 billion of taxpayers' money on his own vanity projects, not here at home, but in foreign countries. In fact, last week in this House, the Minister had the gall to crow about that. Why isn't that money being invested in Canada, and where is the promised accountability?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member opposite for our shared concern about this global issue of climate change. And as such a global issue, it is important that Canada plays a leadership role so that we can invest in developing countries who share this problem, and we can work together so that we all have a better future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Essex.
Mr. Speaker, this week the Trade Minister plans to sign on to the job-killing TPP trade deal, even though the government has admitted it has no economic impact study. Would the Minister sign a mortgage without knowing the interest rate? There are jobs on the line here, and Canadians will pay the price. My former co-workers in the auto industry and tens of thousands of others stand to lose their livelihoods under this Conservative negotiated deal. Will the government produce an economic impact study before signing any deal?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Honourable member for her question. The TPP was negotiated in secret by the previous government. The NDP criticised that treaty without even having read it. We promised during the course of the election campaign that we would study it. We are signing the agreement precisely to study it. We have consulted Canadians already. We are going to continue to consult through parliamentary processes, Mr. Speaker, and that's precisely the point of consulting Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Berthier-Masquinongé. Mr. Speaker, the economy is struggling, and close to 60,000 jobs are at stake with the signing of the TPP. Our dairy producers are already living in uncertainty, and the government has not acted to protect our supply management system. Even after having promised to act within their first 100 days, they still have not done anything about the milk proteins problem about crossing our borders. So why is the government signing an agreement that's going to jeopardize thousands of jobs and our family farms in Canada? The Honourable Minister.
The Government of Canada fully supports supply management, and the government is engaged with the stakeholders on the outcome of the Trans-Pacific Partnership. We will undergo the importance of compensation to the supply management sector. This government supports supply management, Mr. Speaker.
Honorable député de Louis Saint-Laurent.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors, Monsieur le Président, on sait que la semaine dernière, le gouvernement, dans la fameuse histoire du financement illégal par les syndicats, le gouvernement a dit que lorsqu'ils l'avaient su, ils avaient suivi la loi. Le problème, Monsieur le Président, c'est qu'ils oublient un détail. Et le détail...
The interpretation was not working. We will take a moment to ensure that it is working. So we'll try again.
C'est pas parce qu'on rit que c'est drôle, Monsieur le Président.
So, Mr. Speaker, as I said, last week, the government said that as soon as they had found out about the illegal funding of unions, they immediately obeyed the law. But the problem is that the government has forgotten a detail in an internal email from the union, we learned that it was the Liberal Party that had asked to hold the event, and that 23 people were paid to stand behind the Prime Minister during that event. So that's a big part of the story. Will the Prime Minister finally recognize that Bill C-4 is a way to help those to do illegal funding?
The Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bill C-4 is going to reset labour-industrial relations to a fair balance, one that did not require an attack from the previous government to make it imbalanced. So what we're going to do is reset a fair, balanced network. After that, our economy should see significant improvements.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint Laurent. Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly eager to see that, because in reality is that that illegal event was not the only one. There were two other ones. The Liberal Party organized events with the unions on August 27th in Oakville and September 8th in Vaughan. So can the government reassure us that in both of these cases there was no illegal funding like there was for the other event?
I want to thank the member for the question. I want to thank the member for the question. I want to point out that the case that I'm familiar with was immediately addressed, and we worked with Elections Canada to remedy it. In terms of C4, it's to reestablish fairness and balance, as the members across the way understand.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
Mr. Speaker, it was immediately addressed because they got caught. Mr. Speaker, the government House leader said last week when these illegal donations from big unions first came to light, the Liberals followed the letter of the law. That is simply not the case. We have a document from the union itself that states the Prime Minister's own campaign team asked specifically for union members to be props in this this Liberal campaign event. Can the Jobs Minister finally admit that her bill to gut transparency and accountability in a union bill is simply repayment for these illegal campaign contributions?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, as a number of ministers have said, when we became aware of this problem, we immediately contacted Elections Canada. The money was remitted to the Receiver General, which is required under law, and the union involved signed a compliance agreement. But I hope, Mr. Speaker, you might agree with me that it's somewhat ironic for the Conservative Party to be talking about election law compliance. At the end of this event, Mr. Speaker, nobody left in leg irons.
Colleagues. We're going to hear things that are provocative. Sometimes it's hard to respond, not react, but I know that we can do it. Let's restrain ourselves. The member for Foothills has the floor.
Mr. Speaker, they may have paid back the one, but did they pay back the other two? Mr. Speaker, the Liberals didn't just hold one campaign event, they held maybe at least three. On August 27th, the Prime Minister held an event with the International Union of Operating Engineers in Oakville. On October 8th, he held an event with the Carpenters District Council in Vaughan. In return for bringing forward a bill that is going to cut accountability and transparency in unions, can the Jobs Minister just say that this is repayment for these illegal campaign contributions?
Honourable Member, Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to inform the House I want to thank you for the question and inform the House that this was a campaign promise that we were going to look to retract the two punitive political bills that were made to specifically attack trade unions. That's the purpose of the bills, and that's what we're following up on. Thank you.
Now the member for Regina Louvain.
Mr. Speaker, thousands of resource workers have been laid off. The latest Statistics Canada report indicates that the monthly percentage jump in employment insurance claims was far higher in Saskatchewan than other provinces. Resource workers and their families need real assistance now, but after years of conservative attacks, our employment insurance system is broken. What concrete changes will the Minister of Employment make to improve the accessibility, level, and duration of employment insurance benefits?
Honourable Minister of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There is no doubt in this House that the employment insurance system needs modernizing. This was a commitment of our election promise. We are in the process of doing so. We will soon see immediate changes to parts of the EA system and longer-term systemic changes in the years coming up.
The honourable member for Churchill-Kiwatanuk-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, Canadians are struggling, and just telling unemployed workers to hang in there is not going to cut it. Monsieur le Président,
Mr. Speaker, people who are losing their jobs need help now, not in 2017. But according to the Minister of Social Development, some things have to wait, and that is an unacceptable answer. Can the minister confirm that the EI eligibility threshold of 360 hours will be restored? Yes or no?
Of Employment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the member for the question. There were some measures put in that are extremely punitive, including an enormous amount of hours that are directed for new entrants, like young people, or immigrants that can find it very hard to meet those thresholds. It's our intention to move on those provisions extremely quickly.
The honourable member for Brampton South.
Mr. Speaker, one of this government's stated priorities is to bring greater openness and transparency to government. An important area in need of review and reform is the supply process, by which the members are able to scrutinize and review government expenditures and hold the government to account. Yet the present process has some important shortcomings. Can the President of the Treasury Board please inform the House of his plans to address this problem?
Honourable President of the Treasury Board.
Thank the honourable member for the question. To make Parliament and government more open, transparent and accountable, it's critically important that we reform and realign the estimates and budget process. We want to empower parliamentarians to once again be able to scrutinise spending and to hold government to account. And that's why tonight we invite MPs and senators from all parties to join us for a briefing on the estimates process. We need to have a common understanding of the estimates process today and what it's going to take to fix it and to actually make Parliament work.
The honourable member for Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, it was bad enough last week when Canada was not invited to the anti-ISIS meeting in Paris. The Liberal government was snubbed because they expect other nations to fight terrorism while they cut and run, taking out our CF-18s without a plan. Then, late last week, the rookie Minister of Defence blamed our allies for the spread of terrorism. Instead of condescendingly lecturing our allies, why doesn't the Defence Minister finally tell us how he will use our military in the fight against ISIS?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, I learned my lessons working with our allies. And what I said at the speech at the Canada 2020 is when I was actually working with them and learning about the issues that allows radical organizations to take advantage of certain issues and then having to form coalitions after the fact. And what I want to be able to ask the member opposite is, where was their government in looking at those issues? Why did they allow such an issue to get so big and not attack ISIL when it was a small organization? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
For Selkirk, Interlake, Eastman.
Mr. Speaker, we had a plan that was respected by our allies. Last week resembled a blast from the past, a time a former Trudeau government would cozy up to communist regimes and chastise our allies. Last week, the Minister of Foreign Affairs indicated that Canada was going to normalize relations with totalitarian regimes like Iran and Russia. And then on Friday, our rookie Minister of Defence suggested our allies were to blame for all that's wrong in the Middle East and the spread of terrorism. Why are the Liberals lecturing our allies on how to fight terrorism while at the same time befriending Putin and Iran?
Now, the Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, it's about consulting our allies and having a dialogue. These lessons, as I stated, was learned while working with our coalition partners, and that's the plan that we'll be putting forward, making sure that we get this right so we don't make the mistakes of the previous 10 years. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I've just come back from a meeting of the NATO Parliamentary Association in Washington, and in contrast to what the government is saying, the Congress and State Department representatives told me that they were very unhappy about Canada's planned withdrawal of the fighter jets in Iraq and Syria. So why is the government alienating our allies and determined to make bad decisions?
The Honourable Minister of National Defence.
Mr. Speaker, as we stated, we are committed to ending the airstrikes. However, we have taken the time to making sure that we check the entire situation out. I've visited the region twice. I've spoken with our allies. I've spoken with my counterparts. And when we come out with our plan, it's going to be making sure that we actually have not only a positive impact, but making sure that this is one that's going to impact our allies and have a contribution for years to come. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, on the weekend, 45 people were killed and 110 others wounded in an explosion in Damascus that was claimed by the Islamic State. The government is dragging its feet on a new plan, though, to fight the Islamic State. The government seems incapable of coming up with a plan. Can it at least explain to Canadians what its intentions are?
Mr. Speaker, we have to make sure that we take our time with this. To making sure that we consult our allies, making sure that we assess what the enemy situation is, and I want to make sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, because every single time we make those mistakes as political leaders, we send our men and women into harm's way for no reason, and I will not repeat those mistakes again. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert. Mr. Speaker, during the election campaign, millions of Canadians voted to say no to the planned demolition of the CBC under the Conservatives. For 10 years, the CBC was attacked and needs some oxygen. The government made promises. It has to keep them now. The Minister of Heritage has not confirmed anything, yet there was a clear election commitment. So my question is simple. Will the government invest $150 million a year in the CBC like it promised? The Honourable Minister of Heritage. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank my colleague for his question. We were elected on a platform that is ambitious in the area of arts and culture. We want to deliver that platform.
Honourable Member for Cowichan, Malahat, Langford.
Mr. Speaker, that's not an answer. A promise isn't something you can just say to get yourself elected. Canadians expect this Liberal government to keep its promises. Page 56 of the Liberal platform promises to, quote, reverse Stephen Harper's cuts and invest $150 million in new annual funding. CBC is the cultural spine of this nation, the very essence of Canadian identity. Will the Canadian government keep its promise on CBC? Just one word, yes or no.
The Honourable Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Mr. Speaker, we strongly believe in the importance of a public broadcaster and a public content creator in this 21st century. And this is why we will reinvest in CBC Radio-Canada, and that's a platform commitment, and we will abide by it. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Brant-Banff-Airdrie.
The Minister of Democratic Institutions seems to be confused about the meaning of the word public. While she claims the new Senate Advisory Board appointment process is available online, the entire process is conducted entirely behind closed doors, keeping Canadians completely in the dark. The Advisory Board will meet in secret, provide a non-binding list in secret, and then the Prime Minister may or may not choose a senator from that list, again, in secret. So I ask the Minister, why the secrecy?
The Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr.
Speaker, an independent, non-partisan advisory board has been established to assess Canadians against a list of public criteria that will allow us to enhance the overall functioning of the Senate. I invite the honourable member to review our website for upcoming details and news.
Yes.
Honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The minister is quoted today in the media as saying that holding a referendum to change the voting system would be doing, and I quote, a disservice to Canadians. Mr. Speaker, in 2007, the Government of Ontario held a referendum on whether to change its voting system to mixed member proportional. So my question to the minister, who like me is from Ontario, is simple. In 2007, did she vote in that referendum, or did she regard the referendum as being such a disservice to Ontarians like herself and myself that she withheld her vote as a protest against that entire illegitimate process?
I'm not sure that how someone voted previously is a matter of the responsibility of the government. I think we're going to have to go to the next question from the member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
I don't know how fair that was to the minister, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Ontario in 2007, PEI in 2005, BC in 2005 and 2009, the UK in 2011, New Zealand in 92 and 93, when that country voted to adopt mixed member proportional, and then in 2011 when they voted to keep it. Citizens of all these jurisdictions on all these dates were given a referendum on whether to change their voting system. Sometimes they voted yes, sometimes they voted no. Yeah. How would it be a disservice to Canadians to treat us like adults too and submit any new voting system for direct citizen approval and referendum?
Now the Minister of Democratic Institutions.
Mr. Speaker, I would hope that the member opposite would work on his attention to detail when reviewing articles with the minister. Last week, we acknowledged that it wasn't until 100 years ago that some women in Manitoba got the right to vote, a right that would only be extended to Indigenous peoples in 1960. It is in that spirit of evolution and inclusion that we will undertake a process to consult with Canadians in a meaningful and thorough discussion about ways to modernize our democratic institutions.
I know we want to have more and more women parliamentarians in the House of Commons, and it's important that we have a workplace that is civilized. So let's ensure it's not like a 1950s old boys club in here. It's not there anymore. Thanks. I appreciate it, but no thanks.
The honourable member for Pierrefonds-Dollard. Mr. Speaker, falling prices for natural resources have had an important negative impact on the Canadian economy. At times such as this, we understand the importance of having a more diversified economy. Can the Minister of Industry tell us about any initiatives that are being undertaken to promote new industries and help diversify the Canadian economy?
Ministre de l'Innovation.
The Honourable Minister.
I'd like to thank the member for the question and his hard work on this file. The government understands the importance of economic diversification, and we have a plan to make it happen, Mr. Speaker. We're committed to a very comprehensive innovation agenda that's focused on startups, scale-ups, and making sure we focus on commercialization. Nowhere is this issue more important in those single resource-based communities that are affected by a changing economy, Mr. Speaker. That is why this government is focused on a growth agenda. That is why this government is focused on an innovation agenda that will create jobs from coast to coast to coast.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park, Fort Saskatchewan.
Mr. Speaker, this weekend over 80 people were killed by Boko Haram in Nigeria, including a number of children who were burned alive. Canada's Office of Religious Freedom is part of a project in rural Nigeria that created a network of Muslim and Christian leaders who have been working together to reduce this type of violence. These projects are needed now more than ever. So why are the Liberals shutting down the Office of Religious Freedom and once again running away from the fight against radicalization and terrorism?
Now, the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First of all, Canada deplores Boko Haram's latest atrocities against Nigerians, including innocent and defenseless children. To move to the matter of the Office of Religious Freedom, it's important to understand that the decision has not yet been made. The promotion and protection of human rights, including freedom of religion, of belief, and of conscience, is an integral part of Canada's history and constructive leadership in the world. We are currently examining our options on how best to build on the good work that has been done so far and enhance our efforts to champion peaceful pluralism, respect for diversity, and human rights.
The Honourable Member for Laurier-Sainte-Marie. Mr. Speaker, in 2013, the Conservative government ended Canada's assistance to the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees. This agency, as we know, provides humanitarian assistance to the most vulnerable people in the world, and it also helps keep thousands of young Palestinians in school. My question is simple. Will the minister restore Canadian assistance to the agency? Yes or no? Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Institutions. Thank you. I would like to thank my colleague for the question.
Shares the plight of many people around the world who are suffering, and humanitarian crises have increased dramatically over the past decade. Our minister is currently in the region at the moment to look at how we can better assist those that need it, particularly when we're talking about refugees in Syria and Jordan, and are committed to re-engaging with the region. And as our Prime Minister said, we're back. And we're here to help, and we're looking for new opportunities. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Mr. Speaker, on Friday, I had the opportunity to visit the company headquarters of Novabus in Saint-Eustache. This company builds transit vehicles and is currently developing a 100% electric bus. I got to see the benefits and effectiveness and efficiency of these buses. At a time when Canada is showing its environmental leadership, what is the government's plan regarding the electrification of transit? The Honourable Minister of Transport. I would like to thank my colleague, the member for Rivière-des-Mille-Îles, for her excellent question. The government recognizes that the use of alternative fuels is going to be very important in our transition toward a greener economy. And certainly this involves transit vehicles and also recharging station for electric vehicles. This will help our economy and our environment. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, with the criteria of Canadian heritage programs, Canada will be dictating the identity of public affairs programs in Quebec like Bazo TV. This program will disappear under the new interpretation of the criteria for the federal tax credit. So this program, which hasn't changed for 10 years, is expected to adapt to the criteria, not the other way around. We shouldn't have to do that. So will the government commit to restoring the tax credit? Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the colleague for his question. I want to say that the criteria was withdrawn in June 2015, and I was informed that the current and future productions will not have this apply.
Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, 18 months ago, a trade agreement was signed with the European Union. Our cheese producers haven't seen any sign of compensation. The Minister of International Trade is now getting ready to sign the TPP. Before signing the agreement, will the minister agree to compensate our supply-managed producers?
Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate my honourable colleague's question. The fact is we certainly support supply management, and we are consulting. Well, we are consulting with the sector. That's what we should do, and that's what we are doing. And we're signing the deal so we can continue to consult with the sector. And we do understand the importance of compensation. Thank you for your question.
We have a member for Saanich, Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to begin by commending the Honourable Minister of Immigration for, I think, quite heroic efforts to put in place a system to welcome Syrian refugees. But that system remains imperfect. That system is, at this point, not responsive to specific situations, such as those who are political dissidents within Syria, who are personally at risk, and who may need fast-tracking to get to safety. I want to ask the Minister if his department and if he will personally consider amending the situation, changing departmental policies so that specific dissidents can get to Canada to safety more quickly.
Minister of Immigration.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my colleague for her strong support on the issue in general, and I would remind her that we have recently launched a Family Link program which seeks to match Canadians wanting to sponsor refugees with Syrian Canadian families whose relatives need help. We're also working on a family unification program for those still in Syria, but I will look into her specific question of today regarding those who are being threatened and what we can do for them.
This will conclude question period. I have 2 points of order. The first, the honourable member from Abbotsford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I believe it is customary when a minister of the Crown makes comments in the House that are actually incorrect, that there's an opportunity for the minister to correct the record. Now, if I can just quote the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, it was the first time in over a decade that WEED actually met to talk about the challenges of climate change. In fact, that is patently false. As I mentioned during question period, that meeting took place, there was a meeting that took place last...
My honourable colleagues know that we have lots of points on here on which we disagree what the facts are sometimes, and the House has not given the power to the Speaker to decide which are which, and that's probably a good thing. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise on a point of order in what I believe is an inappropriate comment that was made from across the way. The Minister of Defence was providing an answer which is quite legible. Individuals heard the question, and yet the member from Calgary-Minipur stated from across his seat